Alrighty, everyone, welcome back. So, tomorrow, or today, whenever you're watching this video, is the 2024 NHL Draft. And I figured that since I've made already, I think I've made 3 of these previously. I've definitely made more than 3 when you include the podcast ones. But it's time for my final 2024 NHL mock draft. Now, we're doing a little bit differently. With my podcasts, we did the entire first round. Just for this, I'm doing only the top 20. Because if I'm being honest, my knowledge outside of the first 20 prospects that are on my board here is not great. I'm going to be honest. It's not great. So I figured I would go with the guys that I mostly know and go through, the non-playoff teams and some of the teams that lost in the first round as well. So we won't waste any more time. We'll get straight into it here. So in the last ones, I went actually 16-1, or I guess in this case 20-1. We're going 1-20 this time. So then that way, a little bit different, and we were doing that for the podcast. So first overall to the San Jose Sharks. Should not surprise anyone. It's Macklin Celebrini. And Celebrini is the consensus first overall pick. He's listed as a great two-way center for Boston University. If he drafts to the San Jose Sharks, he will be going there immediately. I don't think he'll play a year in college. He will go straight to the NHL. So, again, he's the consensus first overall pick. There's really not much I should go on there with Celebrini because everything's been said about him already. Second overall is where it gets interesting. Now, there's been some debate between Demidov, Levshunov, even Siliev's been in the conversation a little bit. But I'm going with a defenseman here. It looks like Chicago's leaning towards a defenseman. So I'm going to go with Artem Levshunov here at the second overall pick. Levshunov is probably, I would argue, the best defenseman in this draft. And I don't think it comes close. He has great offensive skill, has a good defensive style game, and I think he'd be a good pick there for Chicago at second, who has the forward prospects. And if they wanted to go with someone like Demidov, it wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't hate it. But I do think that they will go with Levshunov here at the second overall selection in this draft. There were also rumors, too, pointing towards it, and I think it does happen. So third overall to the Anaheim Ducks is, I would argue, where the draft begins. There have been arguments for Demidov at 2, but I think the draft really begins at third overall. And Pat Verbeek has a history of going off the board in years before. He drafted Mason McTavish relatively early in 2021, but this year, I'm going with someone who probably would be off the board. Anton Siliev at the third overall pick. This might surprise some people, but he's actually ranked third overall by the Hockey News, who I have up here. So, I do believe that Siliev has a spectacular defensive style. He's 6'7". His comparison's Victor Hedman, which I don't really know how that's going to be, because he has not great offensive numbers. But he played in the KHL for pretty much the entire season this past year. As a young kid, that's good, and he puts up spectacular defensive numbers, and I think for a team like Anaheim, who's looking for some defense, Siliev makes the most sense at third overall. Is it a reach? Yes, but it's what Anaheim needs. If they go for a forward, I would be shocked. If they went with someone else, like let's say Bouillon or Perrick, I guess I wouldn't hate that, but I do think that, above all, I think Siliev should go at third overall to the Anaheim Ducks. At fourth overall here to the Columbus Blue Jackets, we go back to a forward and back to reality here. We got Ivan Demidov at fourth overall. This would be a steal for Columbus. He's a little bit undersized, which is making his stock in the draft drop a little bit. But I do believe that Demidov at fourth, I think he's a guy that will do very well with the Columbus Blue Jackets, has the skill set to be incredible in the NHL, and put up good numbers in the KHL minor leagues. Did not play a ton in the KHL, but then again, young guys, it's just a little bit hard for them to get into the KHL, obviously, so that's something you got to keep in mind. But Demidov at fourth, I think that's where I have him. It makes the most sense for me. I know there were some people that think he will go 2 or 3, but I think he drops all the way down to 4, and I'm not going to be surprised about it whatsoever. Fifth overall to the Montreal Canadiens, I have Caden Lidstrom going here. If the Montreal Canadiens passed on Caden Lidstrom, I would be dumbfounded. Lidstrom, even though there are some concerns about his back, I still think that he should 100% be a top 5 pick. And if Montreal went with a defenseman here, I'd be really weirded out. Because I feel like they have so many good defensive prospects. I feel like they would want to go for a forward, in my opinion. But obviously, I've been wrong before. But I do think Lidstrom might have one of the better upsides of this draft class. His comparison is actually Mikko Rantanen. So he's got a pretty high hill to climb there when you look in terms of that. But I think Lidstrom, perfect 5th overall guy to Montreal. They need a forward, and I think Lidstrom's the guy they want to go with. So at 6th overall here to the Utah Hockey Club. Utah, it gets interesting here. You have a lot of defensemen on the board, and I think this is where we start seeing them go. I have Sam Dickinson going at 6th overall to Utah. So Dickinson I like a lot. Not only because he has good offensive numbers, good defensive numbers as well as a defenseman. I am a big fan of him because he has the same last name as me. You know, that connection, it kind of makes you feel a little bit hyped. And I do hope that he does go to one of my favorite teams, which, by the way, yes, I am rooting for Utah. I was a Coyotes fan, but I'm now rooting for Utah. So I think Dickinson at 6th overall makes the most sense because Utah, I almost said Arizona, also needs a defenseman. And I think that their D-core really needs to be upgraded this offseason. And I think that Dickinson would be a great piece to pick up to get that going for sure. So at 7th overall here to the Ottawa Senators is when it gets interesting. You would think Ottawa needs a defenseman. You would think that's where they go. I don't think so, though. I feel like they go with Tej Aginla at the 7th overall pick. Listen, I understand that Calgary Flames fans are not going to be too happy about that, but when you're the son of Jarome Iginla, it's going to get some pretty high stock value on you. And he's definitely going to go higher than his dad was, because I think his dad was like a 4th round pick. But Iginla put up great numbers with Kelowna. His comparison is actually Brandon Hagel. I feel like he'd be a little bit better than Hagel, but regardless, Iginla has a lot of potential, and I think for a team like Ottawa who's looking for some more young forwards, I think Iginla would fit just well into that lineup. And as well as that, too, it makes the offensive core absolutely wild in Ottawa. A lot of young players, a lot of scorers, and I think Iginla would be a big help to that for sure. So 8th overall here to the Seattle Kraken, I have Zane Parik. So going back to the defenseman here, Parik's actually ranked relatively high in the rankings, but Parik, I think there's some issues with his defensive play. He's good offensively. He's got good all-around numbers, but I feel like some defensive numbers could be a little bit better in his play, and I feel like that might make his stock value drop in the draft a little bit. But obviously, when you're playing in the OHL, you put up almost 100-point season as a defenseman. I think you definitely deserve some consideration to get into the top 10, and I think Parik at 8th overall to the Kraken, who, by the way, need defensemen, make the most sense there at 8th overall. So 9th overall to the Calgary Flames. It's unfortunate that, obviously Tej Aginla didn't drop there because obviously they want Aginla, but I have Zeev Buium going at 9th overall to Calgary. And you could argue that he's a little bit too low on this list. I wouldn't deny you with that. But Buium, I feel like his comparison's Devon Toews. He blossomed at the World Juniors this past season and played really well for a national championship in Denver. And I think that he's probably one of the most underrated defensemen in this draft. But I feel like he will drop for some reason. He seems like one of those guys who strikes me that will drop. I've been wrong before, and I probably am wrong. But I think Buium probably may drop a little bit here, but I like him at 9th overall to Calgary, who wouldn't mind some defense after all of them pretty much just leaving either trade or free agency. I think it makes the most sense. But again, if they wanted to go with a forward, if Aginla's there at 9th, of course they take Aginla. But regardless, I think Buium at 9 makes the most sense. So at 10th overall here to the New Jersey Devils, we reached the halfway mark of this draft. I am going with Konsta Helenius from Jokerit in Finland. I like Helenius a lot. I feel like when you look in terms of guys in this draft, Helenius is the most underrated, and he also has a really high ceiling, too. He's one of the players who could become, stellar. His comparison's Braden Point. He definitely could be a steal for the Devils at 10th overall, if they do have that 10th overall pick by the time the draft actually goes live. But I think New Jersey has a legitimate chance here at 10th overall to get a good player, even though they're 10th. And I think if Helenius is there, that is a steal. But it also wouldn't surprise me, too, if Helenius goes higher in this draft. It would not surprise me whatsoever. But it also wouldn't surprise me if it goes lower. Honestly, this draft is so wide open. Guys could go anywhere, and it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. So at 11th overall, here to the San Jose Sharks. Literally, like right before I was going to make this video, the Sharks made a trade with the Sabres to exchange the 11th and 14th overall picks. So it obviously changes the swap there. But it definitely surprised me. But it doesn't change my rankings. I'm going with Beckett Seneke at 11th overall to the San Jose Sharks. I think Seneca would make more sense for the Buffalo Sabres, but I do feel like that Seneca has really risen up in the rankings a lot in this last 2 months, and I feel like he could go just outside of the top 10, maybe even make it into the top 10, honestly. But I had great numbers with Oshawa, which was not a great team this past year, and I feel like he has a lot of potential to become an effective forward. And I mean, hey, San Jose getting Beckett Seneca and Macklin Celebrini, that's a pretty good draft, I'd say, in the first round at the very least. So 12th overall to the Philadelphia Flyers. I'm wearing their jersey here. I have Cole Yzerman going to the Flyers. Hear me out. Hear me out before you start getting mad, because guys like Catton, Yakimchuk, Nygaard are still on the board. But I have seen some things today that make me think that they're going to draft Yzerman tomorrow or today, whenever you're seeing this. They interviewed him twice. Usually when you interview a player twice, that means you head in the direction of, yeah, I want this guy. And I think that the Flyers look at Yzerman, who can score, for one. Having Mitchkov and Yzerman would be insane. But it seems like that's where they want to head towards. And do I agree with it? I don't really know. But I feel like for a guy like Yzerman at 12th, I don't think he'd be terrible for the Flyers, but I think there are some things that Yzerman needs to improve on before he gets to that level. But obviously, we'll see if they do actually end up going with him. At 13th overall to the Minnesota Wild, that leaves some guys on the board. I'm going with Berkeley Catton. Catton, I think, had some good numbers with the Spokane Chiefs, a team that was not good whatsoever. The only problem with Catton is that he's undersized. He's very undersized, and I feel like that could very well make his value drop. He could be a really good two-way center and could be someone like Sebastian Aho. Not saying he will be Aho, but could be someone like Aho. But I do think that there's a chance that he does drop in these rankings. Not a lot, but surely a little bit because of how small he is. That's just typically what you see with guys who are a little bit smaller. Like, for example, Demidov dropped to 4 in my rankings just because he's smaller. That's just how the NHL is with guys with size. At 14th overall to the Buffalo Sabres, they obviously, made a trade earlier today to trade for the 14th pick. But I'm going with Carter Yakimchuk at 14th overall. A big-sized, big-shot defenseman who I think would be the good pick there for the Sabres at 14th. Honestly, the Sabres, when you look at them, they have a great forward core. You don't really need to change that up that much. I would say they need defense, and I think Yakimchuk's the perfect guy for that job. And he's tall, he can hit, he has a good shot, and I feel like that screams Buffalo Sabres to me. So it makes sense they're dropping back to 14th to get Yakimchuk. We'll see if he's even there, though, tomorrow. I've seen him go as high as 12th. I've seen him go as high as, 4. Honestly, I have no idea where this guy goes. Again, this draft, incredibly wide open, and anything can happen. Honestly, anything can really happen in this draft. So at 15th overall here to the Detroit Red Wings, I have a guy that I think they're going to like at 15th, and I think he could be a massive steal. I have Michael Brandsegg-Nygaard at 15th overall here. I like Nygaard. Nygaard put up good numbers in the Mora IK, and I think that's the Swedish junior leagues. He's had spectacular numbers, great shot, moves the puck very well, good playmaker. I think he'd make the most sense for the Red Wings at 15th overall. He's a steal. I think he genuinely is going to be a steal in this draft. And I think if the Red Wings can land him, that's awesome. So we'll see what happens there with Nygaard, but I think he should go at 15th overall to the Red Wings. 16th overall here now to the St. Louis Blues. I have Stan Stolberg, or I think it's Stan Stolberg. So Stolberg's interesting because he's actually risen up a lot of rankings, and I actually have to look for him here on my hockey news because he's been ranked relatively lower in a lot of these. He's ranked 55th on the hockey news. His comparison's Jake McCabe, but I think Stolberg has a good chance to rise up really high in this draft and go to St. Louis, who needs some defense. So I wouldn't hate it there. Would it surprise me if they go in a different direction? No, but I think that Stolberg would be a solid pick there at 16th overall. Maybe a little bit too high, but I still think it's pretty good. So at 17th overall to the Washington Capitals, we move into the playoff teams. I have Michael Hage. Hage played for the Chicago Steel in the United States Hockey League. His comparison's Jonathan Marchessault, so a Conn Smythe winner there regardless. I think he's put up good offensive numbers. He definitely is going to take some time to develop. He's a project, but I think Washington has nothing but time there to get Hage developed. 18th overall, I have Saka Boisvert. Boisvert also played in the USHL for Muskegon. He's also going to take some time to develop as well. And I think for a guy like him compared to Charlie Coyle, I think he'll be better than Charlie Coyle, but I think that the potential really is there to put up some good offensive numbers for Chicago. And Chicago, again, has time to wait for him to develop. So I would say that Levshunov and Boisvert, I think the forward and the defenseman makes the most sense for the Chicago Blackhawks. 19th overall to the Vegas Golden Knights, I have Trevor Connolly. So people might be a little bit disagreeing on why he's ranked lower than usual. It's because he had some controversy on social media for posting some pretty messed up stuff. Nothing like horrible, I guess, but it's still something that makes you drop. Like, he didn't do anything that would make him not get drafted. Will teams pass on him, though? Absolutely. But regardless, Connolly at 19th overall, I'm not trying to degrade what he did. It was still messed up. I'm not going to bring it up here. But I do think that his value will drop because of that. And finally, at 20th overall to the New York Islanders, I have Igor Chernyshov. I think Chernyshov's an underrated pick there. He played in Russia. His comparison's Valery Nichushkin, so already a pretty high hill to climb there at 20th overall. But that is my 2024 final mock draft. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Obviously, there's a lot of guys that I missed. When I do my review on Friday nights, or I guess early Saturday, I will be talking about, obviously, some of the guys that weren't drafted and, the ranks they went up and all that. And I'll obviously go back to mine as well. But regardless, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe down below. I greatly appreciate it. But anyways, thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.